Good afternoon. This is November 18th, 2024. And this particular time and moment, I would like to use this 1 hour to clarify some of the passages or direction I'm heading into. For those who have known about me or have met me at the platforms in Facebook called conscientization, and this is one subject that I have engaged for close to 30 years. First and foremost, I grew up in Brazil, and it's a very rare occasion that the term conscience, as you all can find out, conscience cannot be taught. Conscience is a cumulative of one's thinking, be that we can do introspective thinking, basically a self-examination the Greeks have done, and Socrates and Plato had all talked about a life is not examined, is not worth living. The second part of the introspection collectively is reflection. And the third, I just using imagination, thinking for present into the future. And because the conscience that I'm emphasizing and writing at this point, called the pedagogy or the teaching mechanism about human conscience. So pedagogy of conscience is going to be a full momentum writing and advocating conscience and fostering this particular title or this particular topic about human conscience. And the sequel of the book, which had already started, I actually have gone into the conscience psychology. Much of my work has been encouraged from the time I read about conscientization, almost putting in action. That is by the emphasis of Paulo Freire in Brazil. Let me try to put this into an education perspective, very practical. Paulo Freire is coming from the Nordeste or the northwest part of Brazil, used to suffer from droughts and very poor region of Brazil. He left his career as a lawyer, growing up also poor, and suffer a little bit of the upper middle class, and to a little bit of the poor region of Brazil when his father passed away. So from his life experience, this cross-section of the society had driven Paulo Freire to emphasize using conscience conscientization in action is one of the major and rich elements in the use of education. Some of the highlights of Paulo Freire is basically he had emphasized we cannot keep teaching students by stuffing them by the sort of courses or curriculum that they have little use. In general, what Paulo Freire has said is let's practice less of the banking or bankers' drawers. Okay, in the next 10 days, Thanksgiving is coming. And a cross-cultural person as I am, I'm using this to say, do not stuff your children or your students like stuffing a Thanksgiving bird, a turkey. Now, these are the dynamic things, how to apply this kind of teaching and into the existing systems who often lack in the bureaucracy, the requirement, the test, and so on and so forth. But overall, I think by me emulating, loving so much of the Brazilian upbringing, be that the music, be that the bossa nova, samba, the subcultural group, what we call the macumba, umbanda, erroneously the American had called the voodoo or the Santeria of the Spanish, or in the island of Haiti, or in Louisiana, when this kind of old culture practice coming in slavery from West Africa or by the tribal region called Yoruba in and around Nigeria today. The mixture of the culture and the engagement with the Brazilian culture, be that you know how to dance a samba, there's no kind of rhythm. There's about 18, 20 movements in less than a couple of seconds. It's not like the humbaba of the waltz of the so-called the marching songs and drum. That what is the total enrichment the cultures in Brazil that I have experienced can overrule all the rules. So let me come back to the point about to be spontaneous. It must to be natural. I did not reflecting on this term spontaneity, not just by Paulo Freire. I love the writings of Darcy Ribeiro as a cultural anthropologist. And also, I'm very much influenced by the reading of the books written by Jorge Amado. For some of those of you have seen the wonderful, the beautiful woman Sonia Braga in the Gabriela, the movie made in Paraty, not far from my old school, between Rio and São Paulo. In fact, Paraty, Parati, is precisely the city on the coast of São Paulo and Rio, makes the division line between Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo. So the collective experience, now I'm also extracting what were the influences by Paulo Freire's comment about conscientization. After I did the translation from Portuguese to English, conscience, and click it again into Chinese, it came out to be 良性, the kind heart, or the culture of a kind heart. If you think about kindness, why I'm talking about this subject matter, it evolves with other additional fields. By me talking about our cultural sphere, from Brazilian culture in the language of Portuguese to cultural surrounding, into the English conscientization translated into China, another cultural zone defining one cannot be kind without being good. It is that simple. You have a certain kind of a sense of goodness to be kind, to be good, to be sympathetic, to have empathy, and to have feelings of other people. So indirectly, Paulo Freire's conscientization, to translate into Chinese, I name Paulo Freire's conscientization into one zi chan, one word Zen. In other words, Paulo Freire had awakened me because since 1962, when we left Macau to Brazil, until 73, between my bachelor's degree heading into master's degree, I have basically never had much the need to reflect about my Chinese past. Even though we speak Cantonese with my mom, we speak a hybrid Mandarin because my Mandarin acquired from Brazil coming from a hybrid of the people speaking their native tongue, be that Guoyu from Taiwan, Puzhonghua from mainland, and for another large ethnic group, which is the painter, the family from Zhang Daqian, the famous Chinese painter and who also lived in Brazil with my family, where my father and him were good friends in the early 30s, 40s. And one of my half brother was born into Zhang Daqian's brother's home in Sichuan. So this intercultural link, the linguistic link, but never from 62 until 73, I have much about a concern about what I am, who am I, what am I going to be? I have been very well educated, schooled by the Salesian orders from Macau Italian order, John Bosco, Don Bosco, DOM in Brazil, a Don Bosco in Latin language. And from this part of a schooling, that what I have learned to become forever enthused with the good education, where in less than 5 years, I have captured the fluency of Portuguese to a large extent, a good amount of time spent and into speaking, expressing, and as you can see, beyond the Portuguese speaking, like any immigrants, the captivation of the musicality of Brazil and the time and period in the 60s called tropical, the tropical, the writers, poets, the lyrics by the many writers, Chico Buarque de Holanda, who wrote the song Banda, the band, basically with a lot of sarcasm or satire about governments coming in, like the band coming through the town. Everybody look, everybody listen, everybody pay great attention to the musicality, the sound of the marching band. And then this symbolizes the promises of the incoming candidates, like all candidacy in all political parties. Well, and then after a while, when they come into town and they move on, and the town people going back to their daily routine, the little not so pretty girl putting, her thinking of the band is playing for her, and the traffic director have forgotten to turn the lights on. And funny enough, when we talk about a music song like a banda, and I was in the a banda in the small town in Brazil, halfway Rio, Sao Paulo, in the town called Lorena. I have spent enormous great time when you can not only identify the certain in the episode or event in Brazil, you're actually living through, because I was in a school that I played where know some of the best basketball players. I'm not being immodest, but I created that atmosphere. I was one of the best players in that time of period in my school. I was only 16 years old. And at the same time, the same year in 1964, I also became one of the first non-Brazilian ethnic Chinese who broke the 50-meter breaststroke swimming record. Swimming representing a club called Hebraica with over 5,000 ethnic Jews from everywhere. In any given time, on a table in the club. Now these are big sports clubs with all the convenience and the comfort zone, from tennis court to massage to cinema to 20 tennis courts, football field, basketball field. So the whole family can spend all their weekend or during the week where the housewife can pay with the nannies and maids with the youngsters. But in general, also in the same year, in between 64 65, I actually sang the full hymn of Avanakila, where Moshe Dayan's daughter, Yaya Dayan, came to Brazil, came to all the clubs in different cities, trying to be fundraising for the kibbutz and for the situation in Israel. Also, 63, 64, and 65, in that time and moment, I swam next to Mark Spitz without ever knowing he was the future swimming champ with gold medallions representing US. But at that particular time in point, Mark Spitz was the team member from Santa Cruz, California. I remember all that very well. You know why? Because up until that time of the incoming sportswear named Speedo, all of us were wearing blue, black, one color. Yes, we are way ahead of the Americans in that sense of aesthetics, and maybe the bikini, the very short, tight shorts. But what is nice about the Australian make Speedo, and that you can just bring it and it can be dry in your pocket, back pocket, front pocket. Eventually, in less than an hour, in and out of the pool, that pair of swimming wear is dried. But we were warned by the judges of the swimming events, especially during my events of my state. It's almost national. Sao Paulo is 60% represent Brazil. Whatever Sao Paulo is almost become a national record. And that we may not be able to wear what we wear, the bright orange, blue, green, yellow, red, any color, with the Californian orchid florals flowing on those shorts. Then we were scared, very scared, because we ditched our other shorts. And this coming event, we may not be able to compete. Well, that is a national state event. But just prior to that event, the incoming teams from around the world, probably Australia, but in our club, we only have the Americans, were mainly represented by Mark Spitz as the captain, and the team up from Santa Cruz. But when the opening up the team, every single American swimmer, contestants, have all Speedos, exactly like what we have. The 7 color in the rainbow with the floral designs. So we just say, hallelujah, thanks to the Americans. Now the judges cannot rule the Americans out of the competition. So that event of the Maccabea had allowed us to be using our new swimwear, easy to dry Speedo. At that time, is coming from Australia. Also in 1964, not so pleasant, but let me explain that again. It was the time when João Goulart, the Brazilian president, the left-leaning president, got overthrown by the military regime. I remember very well of the president to be Castelo Branco. And in that same year, looking on the news, they have caught 9 Chinese in Rio and accusing them were the provocators, at the instigators, and those are the one who started the Brazilian communist revolution. First, I found it was absurd. The more I know about the event later in life, and only this year, the history of this part of the forced confession in the use of this 9 Chinese in Rio as the instigator and the provocateurs to trying to turn Brazil into a socialist communist regime. And obviously, João Goulart got exiled. But only after all these years, the latest book written by a Carioca, a writer from Rio, documenting the false accusation, the fabrication of the events. And let me remind everybody else, all these military regimes in this past 40, 50 years, based on my experience, is all being to be totally funded in part or in full by the Americans, or be that the Monroe Doctrine, or the fear of the global communism, be that the Soviet Union, and then eventually China. But what is amazing, what Kissinger and Nixon have done in the 70s to exploit the situation, the ruination, the deterioration between the Khrushchev and Mao and the Chinese and then the Soviet Union. Don't forget, China was facing a double hegemony. Number one is the US and the Western allies. Number two is within the socialist communist regime, the Chinese were fighting every day just as hard of the imposition and the hegemony attitude of the Soviet Unions, starting with Stalin. One by one, eventually got to Khrushchev, where Khrushchev wanting to impose onto China with the Russian fleets onto Chinese shores, because what the Soviet Union often had wanted to make other socialist communist states to become a satellite state. And they wanted China to become predominantly to become the agricultural production nation and not to participate with all the rich minerals or in the Manchuria. The same Manchuria was looking eyeballing by the Japanese, and the Soviet had also exploited the mineral reserves in the region. So to make the story short, 64, where I become the first ethnic Chinese who broke the record in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, 15 meters breaststroke. In the same year, I was invited to join the Olympic team of Brazil. Of course, I turned down immediately because I was only second, third year into Brazil, and I was not a Brazilian citizen, even though it's very gratifying when you're being invited to join the team. 64 with the event of the military take over Brazil, and let me be very genuine speaking. For those like us who live in the outskirts of Sao Paulo, like the city of Lorena and Sao Paulo City, we have not witnessed any commotion, any activity, anytime we were threatening by any quote unquote socialist communist revolts, but we witnessed the large train loads of soldiers, tanks, military, because I lived in the school in Lorena, which nearby the defense forces in the region we call Vale de Paraíba, but in the school and up in the mountain range in Mantiqueira, we have the Agulhas Negras. We have all the military schools and zones in the region. In fact, my school, Colégio São Joaquim, once was a military school, but was taken over by one of the affluent landowners and ceded the school to the Roman Catholic order of the Salesians, for which I am totally grateful. I have nothing to do about like or dislike about the time at that age about military regime changing over from the once democratically elected João Goulart. But all in all, this particular time in point, when I am actually what I'm crediting is the richness of the cultural interface, not even only to the social academic elites. By and large, my father is a Sorbonne graduate, speaking fluent French, speaking fluent Portuguese, came to Brazil in 1952, and as a businessman, invested also. Only come to my awareness recently that my father was one of the earliest Chinese immigrants with his two partners. None of them have children, married. One is ethnic Chinese from Burma, one is ethnic Chinese from Thailand, all schooled in Paris, all wanting a Paris-like ambience with their sheer and development. First, they talk about Milan. You mentioned talk about Lebanon, another very French, afrancesado, we call it, the French-like cities, and then contemplating about Buenos Aires. But eventually, just about my father taking off to Buenos Aires, the two of them had discovered the most glorious, luxurious time and period of the city of Sao Paulo. We call it Época de Ouro. So from 62 to 67, I literally have lived through one of the most dynamic, the growth, the luxury, the opulence of Sao Paulo. But I was also boarding about 250 kilometers away in the city of Lorena. I loved my city life. I love even more in the small town and small school where 24/7, the coexistence, the living experience with my schoolmates coming from the state of Minas Gerais and São Paulo and Rio, we call the area O Triângulo Mineiro in that section. So the rich multiculturalism early on had me totally enticed. imagine I was a record breaker in swimming. I was one of the top players in basketball, but I play a secondary role as a substitute goalie in the afternoon for the major football, and then I become another goalie. We call it football de salon. I think that's another futsal, whatever in the English, the shortening. Then volleyball. Then you play in the band, as a drummer. I learned how to type. I served mass. In the same time, I served lunch and dinner by volunteering my service with another student who got paid. I did not. But imagine, and between 15, 16, 17, the activities, the more you get involved, the more the sound you can hear and more you catch the vocabulary in any language. This interactive time, why I am trying to, going back to the inspiration by Paulo Freire's one word Zen, conscientização or conscientization, to conscience, to now I'm trying to write and redefine the pedagogy, the teaching mechanism, the method, methodology about human conscience. So I am, in part, what I'm doing here, I am extremely, extremely grateful of my living experience in Brazil. And then the year when I left my junior high, our junior high in Brazil is the 9th grade. High school or científico is only 3 years. After ginásio, the 4 years, we have the 3 years to go into científico, meaning going to science area, or most of the women, the lady at that time, doing classical. Classical means literature, education, not sort of hard science in a softer way. The exposure I have after Lorena, and I was dating. Yes, I wanted to first go into the seminary school, but my mother said, no, girls can't, no man. So because my other orientation with the Salesians order, with the visiting priests coming in from the region of Mato Grosso, telling the story with the engagement with ethnic minorities like the Chavantes, very handsome native Indians, looking almost 100% Asiatic. The events, the songs and dance, and the events between the missionary priests, including a couple of the priests at that year between 64, 65 were murdered in Mato Grosso. But what Mato Grosso, for me, is projecting American West, the Western history, be that Wyatt Earp, be that Kit Carson, or the histories of the Wells Fargo banks, the Brazilian frontier, had me totally attracted more for the reason to be with the Salesians and the schooling, the discipline, and the learning, more than the purpose to want to become a priest or join the clergy for reasons evangelization, which was not in my mind. But regardless, in this manner, I'm almost become almost the Andalusian, Hispanic, Arabic, with that part of the fatalism. And that last couple years of my life, I have met Ana Maria Murari, a Brazilian lady. We become friends in so-called namorados, namorada. But the whole idea was that I picked up another cultural sphere by her family moving in from the interior, from the small town Copiraju in the southwest of São Paulo to the city, and her father was the medical doctor, and this family become a surrogate family to me. And don't get me wrong, I love my mom dearly. At that particular time and point in that part of history and time, there were conflicts between my mom and my father, plus other elements, the step brother and business. I needed, maybe I'm not afraid to say, I needed that anchor, the same anchor, the predictability, the cordiality. I mean, to be collegiate, to be using the term collegial, but in that family, I have found another very strong anchor with sound values. And so from this family, I have been invited to the beaches. I have been invited to the small area where they came from, Piraju, where I have conducted myself with the introduction to the society of the young women, young maiden, called the debutante, or like the Latin Mexican culture in North America, quinceañeros. And these are the events, cultural events, now is historical events that have made my attachment with Brazil, with more of the knowledge, first from the city of Sao Paulo, then in Lorena in my 2 years of boarding school, 2.5 years, and then eventually coming back to Sao Paulo, trying to finish in high school, meeting up with Ana Maria's family, the Muraris. This less than 6 years, the coexistence, my living experience in Brazil had enriched my entire life. And so, what I am about to do, and after or since February of this year, the Chinese New Year, I have decided to get involving into the tapes, the conversations, the videos that we are doing, because I perceive technologically we're coming back to the era of the oral history, the orator speak, and now we don't need scribes. By the tape, very soon, or already happening, by the YouTube CC, you can command any language by the audience reading. And very soon, this will become the entire text can be have a printout. So I can do the first editing to correct errors in similar sounds written differently, taken differently by YouTube. But who's to know? With the AI development, we will be able to have the entire text, and then you can make corrections. And people who can participate, like the way I want to formulate open books, is going to be possibly my development of the AI, no less than Chatgpt, or Gemini, or and I'm using daily in collaboration of my writing with Claude. We're advancing. And so this decision to do tapes, in part, is very much encouraged by my wife. Just tell your history. So somebody, your children, someday can share a part of history, good, bad, ugly, and different. And plus my 45 years with a strong global travel from the first 35 years in and out of Brazil, to the remote regions, to the jungles, from the Amazon to the Rondônia in the western part of the area where the native tribes I work with, coming out from the reservation called Roosevelt, the Sintalargas, the Yanomamis, and then the 30 different tribes in Upper Rio Negro in the town of San Gabriel de Cachoeira. But these are all just another part of my travel venture. Yes, adventurous, very much so. I get used to driving between 60 kilometers or 70 kilometers. Sometimes takes 5, 6, 10 hours, or depending on the road conditions. The bridge broke down, you get to find your own log, put it in, and move on. And I have my joint venture in mining in the state of Minas Gerais, in the town I stay at. Eventually, I will talk about that too, is Governador Valadares and Teofilo Otoni in the region of the Vale do Rio Doce and the Vale Quinones region, which is in the northeast side of the state of Minas Gerais. Minas Gerais meaning general mines. But before I got into the business in 77, in 74 and 75, I got my master's degree, where during this time, involving only with a program named Counseling and Guidance. It's a master's degree in educational psychology. And in that same year, I have developed a counseling system called 3Cs. One of the C I'm talking about here, we are sharing a cultural sphere, 3Cs. First, by adapting, modifying the teaching of Eric Burns in the transactional analysis. He often used the three round cycles representing parent, adult, and child. And this tricircle settings also was the modification from the Freudian psychology, with Freud's defining ego, I, and then superego, the cultural part of me, and id, which is one of the most fabulous theory, hypothesis, and with his psychosexual dynamics, which continue today in the use by the many people based on psychoanalysis, and his psychosexual dynamics. And he worked. It is still working for the large part. But where I felt that I have emerged from the Freudian psychology into the more open communication, more humanistic psychology. I mentioned a couple of names: Rollo May, Alfred Adler, Gustavo Jung, who went on to Asia to search for his cultural aesthetics, the superego he was feeding. And then we have Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Searching for Meaning. We have Carl Rogers, who's one of my favorites, and then Fritz Perls with the California, the open concept. And when it comes to Eric Burns, I forgot to another one is Eric Fromm, Fromm. Most of these names, 50% of them, you can put a hyphenated German American. And only time when certain Asian value was presented in this past 50, 75, 100 years was Eric Fromm's book, Psychoanalysis and Zen Buddhism. Okay. And that is also part of my awakening. Start thinking about, okay, I'm ethnic Chinese. What is developing in China? What are the events? And that is from my rich cross-cultural upbringing with the influence, of course, Latin and Greek from the time of Macau. Latin is serving Mass Latin, some lessons. The Greek is coming from the Gregorian chant, the singing of the Latin in musicality, shape and form by the Christians from the Greek region, the Greco-Roman transference from the Aramaic Jewish language, which is still amazing. I just using this example to alert my Chinese friends. One of the famous the series of books written orally or written in other form, the Confucius talk about 四书五经, 4 books and 5 scriptures. But in actuality, there were 6 scriptures. Liu Jing, the 6th scripture, meaning music. But however, the music have not been able to passing on, as we all know. However, look at the richness in the Gregorian chants. It had moved from the time of the migration from the Middle East and from Judea, from the Arabic Semitic language, passing through my patron saint. So I'm no longer in that church-going Catholic, but I have always cherished my upbringing and my patron saint, Paul or Saul from Tarsus. This transformation, who had written basically 50% of the New Testament, his aid to transfer from the Middle East Semitic tribe into the Greco-Roman, where Latin was sung by the most Greek hymns. I think this kind of a cross-cultural dimension, maybe I'm a cross-cultural product, it alerted me more about who have contributed to this cross-cultural um, um, cultural values. We still singing in Latin, in Greek tones. I still can use a few tones like "Tandu ergo sacramentum venene mucernui," all Latin words, but with a Gregorian musicality. So that part of it, the Chinese have a great loss because the sound. But on the other hand, from the Christianity, from the Judeo-Christian form, that part of the musicality and words had expanded the Latin language so broadly by the Romans, part conquest, part culture. So by me emphasizing my next programs, which had already started, is the advocacy about the pedagogy of conscience, I feel comfortable to do in what I do because I have formatted the open book procedure, meaning in whatsoever format I wrote, I express my interpretation of the to address the importance of conscience, because conscience is the language spoken by the Chinese. Here comes the situation. None of the teaching of the Confucius or Lao Tzu from Tao, as you have noticed, and also the teaching of Buddha by way of India, none of this teaching, none of these Chinese cultural groups is about religion. In fact, they all have the same advocacy about shaping the human conscience, and the mechanism which I will try to write and express in my next two books is the conscience is how we can think, act, interpret the right from wrongs in 24/7, 365. What I really meant to say that the cultural dynamics of the Chinese have always been shaped by the three major philosophers, teachers of Lao Tzu, or Confucius, which is Confucius, and Fu, or the Buddha. But unfortunately, there's a huge mishappening when Westerners, and I can be a little nasty, or since 1492, the expansion into the Americas by Columbus, or by the huge era of interpreting America as India, as we call the natives, Indios in Portuguese, and Latin, and Indians in North America. However, eventually the Spanish have eradicated their hypothesis. Columbus' voyage was completed by way of Fernando Magalhães, another Portuguese navigator from the School of Navigation, and also financed by Spain, who had managed in a similar pattern going down the coast of South America and found the strait, now called the Magellan Strait, that landed into the Pacific with calm, where these navigators named the Pacific Island, and eventually going further east, went into the island today we call Guam, and used to be called Isla de los Ladrones, the island of the thieves, and eventually into Cebu, and created the city of Manila, and look at that Spanish territorial gain, all the way from the Oregon coast to Chile, to Peru, Bolivia, where the biggest silver mines, the silver were carried from Potosi, Bolivia, into Acapulco to Manila, with a 6-week, 5 weeks journey through the Pacifics. And then that become I call it the Pacific Ocean Silk Road. But in history, you will get more references when you type in Manila galleons, and back and forth with the goods and merchandise transshipment into Acapulco and on land back onto the region of Veracruz in the Caribbean, or even Havana, still the Spanish territory, and then onward with all the silk, all the textiles, and the porcelains, and all the good stuff from China through the Philippines, through Manila, and then to the New World, the Nueva España, and then back to Spain. And all this trace is complicated and super secretive, because 30% of the silver found in Potosi had gone up to Acapulco and then on to Spain. 70% were exported into Manila and into the main of China. The demand was huge because they were converting the currency into silver. So in brief, we're talking about the Spanish expansion, the Americas, the Indians. But what happened along with this great discoverers, this great navigation skills of the Columbus, and after Columbus come Vasco da Gama, who gone into Calcutta 2 years later, and then 1500, followed by Pedro Alvarez Cabral, who supposedly accidentally have gone into the area today we call Brazil. But in actuality, the more you read about history, and don't be afraid to read some of the offbeats or some of the secondary ideas of history, the Portuguese already have found Brazil in 1460s. They were totally aware of the landmass now we call Brazil, and they have to use the two islands is cross sections. One is called Tristan da Cunha, also by accident, 1962, at age 14, leaving China to Brazil. Our ship stopped by Tristan da Cunha to rescue 3 British scientists. The reason was the islands were sinking. It's a volcanic island called Tristan da Cunha. And Portuguese also found Fernando de Noronha further north. So that is why the fight, my point trying to clarify, the point of references is how John João II of Portugal, in his age, he was actually dying, who fought the treaty formed by the Pope. Okay, now we know which Pope this is. Borgia, origin Spain, maybe biased with Spain, had made the treaty called Tordesillas or Tordesilha in Portuguese, LJ. And the Portuguese fought like hell not to, when they divided the line, on the east side, Africa, Asia is Portuguese, and the west is all Spain. And the Portuguese said, no. We want 360 or 370 sea leagues west, which that is the entire chunk of Brazil and the landmass that gone into the hands of the Portuguese. I mean, this, again, history referencing. I keep repeating this because if you draw your references, if you're wrong, you make mistakes. I'm drawing my references based on the time scale of the 4 navigations. Of course, Magellan came much later, 19 years later than Columbus. But the 3 trips between Columbus and between Vasco da Gama getting into India and Pedro Alvarez Cabral had gone into Brazil. But all this point of references also highlighting the missionaries and the religious order, be that the Jesuits, the Franciscans, the Dominicans, and whatnot, were also moving very aggressively. And this is another motivation. Why they're moving so aggressively? And remember, the Black Death took place in 1200, 1300, just about 100 years, a century before the 1492, and wiped out 1/3 of the European population. And because of this wipeout of the Europeans, the sense of the religious, or the second coming of Christ, or the end of the world, had turned them into a great deal more with zealotry and to be wanting to convince and to baptize the natives with fear that the world is ending soon. Again, this is just my personal hypothesis, my tabulation, my calculation. Again, open book, open discussion. All this hypothesis can be verified or can be neutralized by other findings along the way into the future. But the biggest mistake, because in the European culture as a whole, now here that comes to the crux of the matter, I even added the fourth religious group. Let me put it this way: Judaism, Catholicism, Islamism, the way it's written. Then we can add Protestantism, the off branch from the Roman Catholics by Luther. All were under the Abrahamic cultural group. And subsequently, by calling these four groups into ism, our Western scholars, be that the priests, the clergy, the Western engagement into Asia, and dominantly with China, had turned all the Confucian value, Lao Tzu's Tao, Buddha's Fu, into Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. We are basically using a psychological Freudian projection to turn the Chinese discipline. All three share the very similar base to cultivate human conscience. And by Paulo Freire's conscientização or conscientization, recently, in the last couple of years, I have discovered a main scholar of the Ming Dynasty, 1500s, Wang Yangming, had used basically the same terminology as Paulo Freire to conscientize, to foster awareness of conscience. No one has that methodology, the mechanism, how to have conscience. And his writing was 自良知, forward, kind knowledge from the kind heart. So I find this is a fascinating time to turn this page. 1500 is almost 1,000 years from the time of the three schools of thoughts during the Warring State, or 500 BC in that period. And from another 500 almost, from Wang Yangming to today. And don't forget, there's a huge 50-year and more of a cultural separation, communication, decimation from the West with the quote-unquote communist China and the communist Soviet Union. So I hope by what I'm presenting and by what I am writing, and very much willingly to take on any criticism, any improvement, any suggestion, by using not only what I write, but I put my writing into the system I'm about to create called the Open Books. All participants can share, can find out if you find other richer resources to counter my view or add on to what I know. The system today are even creating a new cultural sphere called ITAI. Let me explain to you why this is important. I am merging my last 30 years engagement in the development of my Gemmfile system under the time period of IT. I started in 1991 when we learned about internet, when we have computer, and when we first installed Microsoft's Word and spreadsheets. And today, IT is coming into the new realm we call AI. So ITAI, I put it in one word and trademarked it, called the ITAI. But in Portuguese, again, phonetically, sound-wise, maybe being creative. In Portuguese, when we asking somebody telling me a story and it says or complaining, that we're gonna say, well, ITAI, and then what? So what? What happened? ITAI. But ita, another double meaning to me, is in the language of the Guarani, Tupi. In all my life in the gemstone business, stone have the reference as to ita. We're the park in São Paulo got the city or the shopping center called Itaim, Itagua. All the IT, you can do the any kind of search or AI search and say, give me all the words in Portuguese from Brazil with ITA. You will find so many language because the stones were part of the reference referral indication geographically on the travel and path by the natives. Mainly, I'm talking about Tupi-guarani in the coastal region. But the environment today we're in can call IT plus AI. And in this particular group, some said we are merging into the part called, we call it the spatial web. And actually, I'm already in it because in my backward search in the use of all the AI assisted program from Chatgpt to Claude to Gemini, I am traveling backward, but I'm not traveling back in that quote unquote the same status. I am a sphere. I'm a ball moving back to the channel of past where I can have no blind spots by driving. This is part of my metaphor. And what I'm doing, I have also discovered that many past wrongs that we have been denied purposefully by many part of the government from all around the world. Because now you're going back with the peripheral vision, 360 traveling, and you have no more blind spots. For those who are really into forensics, I'm doing that in part to have discovered the Portuguese navigation, the status of the School of Navigation by Prince Henry, whereas the School of Sagres in the southern part of Portugal by the Algarve. I'm having fun because when the past wrong were deliberately making an obstacle to you, it channels your other perception in the wrong direction. Truth is truth, past, present, or future. And I found this technologies and the knowledge-seeking elements today are here. It's like anything else. You want to use for good, you can use for good. You want to use the voice of John Kennedy to speak, to adapt to your voice. I call it infringement. I call it plagiarism. But if you think I'm funny, if I want to call the attention of the youngsters with a speaking program, I may want to change my voice to be Daffy Duck or Bugs Bunny. Just so when you use it as a play and play acting and role playing to get to the attention of the youngsters, do whatever you want. Imagination's unending. And this time period of IT and AI, I created thought. ITAI. And so what? I hope this is just the beginning, and I will continue emphasizing the writing and the books when it comes out. You'll be in Amazon, you'll be in 175 languages, and I will print entirely of my writing and how Claude had their input by they giving me the blind side that I have not perceived. They added to the dimensionality of my writing. So if you love education, if you are curious, be always curious. And I will finalize tonight to tell the status to what I admire about the Greek words and Greek thinkers. Sophists are those who are curious. Philos, I think in Greek is lives. So if you're curious and you love life, you become philosopher. So all this past and present elitism, snobby, all that crap will be go out the door. If you're curious, if you love life, you care to learn, you care to find out another dimension of the story told by your ancestors or by your former education. When you learn, you become less prejudiced. I have no problem with the book and the system I'm creating on OPENBOOKS. It is an electronic format where you can insert directly into document. Of course, when you insert, you have your attachment of your background. Either there will be on the text or in the next paragraph, there will be a participation, and anytime, any moment, anywhere, and the text can be ancient to new. Electronically done, you will not be interrupted. You can download the whole book, or you can put a certain paragraph, or maybe it's one chapter. Teacher, student can learn, can share, can give you good point, your counterpoint, your argumentative point. I think learning, when we learned, we reduce our own prejudices or our biased view of all events. And I hope this is one of the great beginnings. May sound like I'm promoting my 2 books, but it's all about searching for truth, searching for knowledge, replacing our past, quote unquote, biased views or less accurate perception of events. Then the whole world can see us in that 360 degrees and spinning in all directions that we cannot find, to be blind by religious bias, by political bias, and personal bias. And I hope this is a good venture with benefit to all users and participants who care to know, who care for truth, and who care to get to know more than what we know today. It's just about learning. Thank you and good night.